Steve, I do not know you, we never met, but I want to take this opportunity just simply to say thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name is Laszlo Sally, and I was born in Budapest, Hungary. But my name was not always Sally. When I was born, my name was Schwartz. My father changed the family name after the Holocaust because anti-Semitism was still running rampant in Hungary, and he felt that my twin brother and I would have a better chance in life not advertising our Jewishness. My very first recollection as a young child is my mother sitting in our living room sewing yellow stars on our clothes because the law was that all Jews, regardless of age, have to wear a yellow star on their clothes. So when we went out on the street, everybody could clearly see, there goes a filthy, lousy Jew. But before I tell you my story tonight, I'm going to ask you to do me a little favor. Just for 1 second, close your eyes and think back to your childhood, and think back as far as you can. When I ask you to do this, most of you will recall a childhood of easy, carefree living, surrounded by loving and secure families. When I think back of my childhood, what I recall is persecution. What I recall is violence. What I recall is starvation. But above all else, what I recall is fear. Constant and never-ending fear. We lived on a beautiful tree-lined avenue in Budapest. The Museum of Natural History was right across the street from our apartment building, and we used to be taken there as young kids. We loved the place. We liked seeing the stuffed animals, the ancient skeletons, rocks, crystals, whatever they showed there. But one day we were going there, and there was this big sign out on the street saying Jews are not allowed. I have never been in that building since. The apartment building had a little garden in front, and this garden had a sandbox where the little kids used to play together. And I played there with my brother many times. But our playmates came to us one by one and told us that they can no longer play with us because their parents forbid them to play with Jews. So my brother and me, we played alone. Until one day, a man looked through the gate, saw us there, 2 little kids wearing the yellow stars, playing there, and he started screaming at us, lousy Jews, wait until I get my hands on you, and started rushing us. And both my brother and I, we ran screaming back to our apartment, and there was nothing my parents could do about that. And that is when the fear started. That was the first time that I realized that there are people out there that wanted to hurt me. That fear has not left me for a very, very long time. New laws came out almost daily. One was that Jews cannot own businesses. My father had a little shop, worked with 3, maybe 4 people. He could no longer own it. So he handed the business over to one of his old trusted employees. The man took the business and immediately fired my father, stating that he will not employ Jews. The Jew employed him for many years, gave him bread to take home to his family, but he would not employ Jews. So there went the family income. New law came out. Jews cannot live wherever they want to. They have to move into a ghetto, or in the case of Budapest, into designated Jewish houses. They simply took a building, they painted a big yellow star on the front gate. That became a Jewish house. Jews had to move in there, whether they had an apartment or not. We were kind of lucky because my mother had two sisters, both married. Both couples lived in the same two-bedroom apartment, each one to a bedroom, and they shared the living room and the small kitchen and bathroom. And that became a designated Jewish house. So we moved in with them. Was not ideal, but at least we were with family. As we moved out of our apartment, the only thing we could carry is what we could hold in our hands. I was a little kid, how much could I carry? I had my pillow and my blanket, and my parents could not carry much else either. As we left our apartment, we looked back and we saw our neighbors rushing into the apartment, grabbing whatever they wanted. There was nothing they could do about it. So we moved on in with my aunt. But it didn't last too long, because one day the Nazis banged on the door and they shoved in another 4, 5 families. Old men, pregnant ladies, mothers with little kids. The place became intolerable. People were sleeping on the floor, head to toe. Hygiene became impossible. We got dirtier and dirtier by the day. We had lice in our hair. We had roaches. We had mice. The rats were not too far behind. And then we had the absolute worst. We had bed bugs. They're miserable little creatures. They're tiny. You can hardly see them. They come out at night. They crawl all over you, they bite you, and you can't even feel their bites because they're so tiny. But next morning, you have little welts on your skin, and it itches like mad. And try to tell a little kid not to scratch with his filthy, dirty hands. You get infections, you get sick. There's no doctor, there's no hospital, there's no medicine, there's no emergency room. If you live, you live. And if you die, there's one less Jew in the world, who cares? So don't imagine an apartment or a house where you live today, that you can go into the bathroom and turn on the faucet and hot water comes out. We didn't have that. We have to heat water in the kitchen, put it in, turn it into the bathtub, get in there and clean yourself with a sponge. With all these people in the apartment, that became impossible. The moment you went into the bathroom, somebody was already knocking on the door, hurry up, I have to go. So that is how we lived. New law came out. Jews can't go out on the street anytime they want to. They can only go out one day a week to do their shopping. That day, some of the merchants just closed up. They did not want to deal with Jews. The ones who stayed open raised their prices, and they put out the worst merchandise that they could not sell to anybody else. The rotten tomatoes, the soft potatoes, the onions that were almost gone already. And this is what the Jews had to buy, if they had money, which most of them did not. As long as my mother had some jewelry, they took her wedding ring, cut it into 4 pieces, and with a little piece of gold you can buy half a loaf of bread, maybe. If you had no money, the only way was to barter. If you had a shirt, a pair of shoes, a winter coat, a hat, anything, you could probably get a little food. And we stood in this apartment and looked out the window, and we saw that day people, old people, going out to try to find some food. And young Nazis surrounding them, kicking them, spitting on them. And we couldn't understand why. We asked our parents, what happened? Why are they beating this old man? What did he do? There was no answer. I remember this one time, this old man with a shopping basket, because we didn't have shopping bags or plastic bags. You did your grocery shopping with a basket. And he was surrounded by 3, 4 young Nazi thugs. And he dropped the basket. And I don't know whether it was an onion or a potato that rolled out, and one Nazi just put his boot down on it and smashed it. And the old man was crying. We couldn't understand it. They could not explain that to us. And then the deportations started. They heard that these people out of this building, they lined them up on the street. They had clubs, they had whips, they had big snarling dogs, and of course they had guns. They marched the people down to the railroad station, shoved them into railroad cars, cattle cars, no passenger cars for the Jews. They took them to the camp, and you know what happened there. I don't have to tell you. My parents were very upset and very worried that if we get deported, my twin brother and me would get into their hands. But we had an aunt, and really she was not an aunt, she was only a family friend. She was not Jewish. What's more, she was the member of the Nazi party. She walked around with the armband of the swastika. If I remember correctly, she had a gun on her hip. And she came to us one day, and she told my parents that she will take my twin brother and me to her place to see if she could save us. And we had no choice in the matter. We had to go with her. So I know something about how it feels when you are separated from your parents at an early age. But we had no choice in the matter. And she was not rich. She had a little tobacco shop, a little hole in the wall, not more than maybe a stage. And she lived behind this shop in a dark, dingy room. There was not even a door between the shop and her apartment, just a curtain. And that's where we went to live. We were also given new names because Schwartz would not do, that's too Jewish. As little kids, we had to learn new names. And we were warned never, ever to tell our real names to anybody. She had a young woman working for her, so she wouldn't have to stand behind the counter all day long. And this woman became very suspicious and kept asking us for our names, and we would not tell. Except one day, she came to me with a piece of candy, and she told me I can have it if I tell her my real name. And let me tell you, I wanted that candy. I wanted it real bad, and I told her. My aunt overheard this from behind the curtain, ran out like a mad woman, fired the girl, threw her out of there right away. And within 5 minutes, We were on our way back to the designated Jewish house to our parents. And do you know why? Because it was a capital offense to hide a Jew. If they found out that she was hiding a Jew, no lawyer, no trial, no judge, stand up against the wall or get down on your knees and they shoot you. Right there on the spot. And of course they shoot the Jew also, whether he's a child or otherwise, it didn't matter. Later on we found out that the girl did go to the authorities and reported her. And they came out and they confronted her. And she was smart. She laughed at them. And she said, brothers, who do you believe? The girl I had to fire for stealing, or me? I'm a member of the Nazi party. She was lucky. They believed her, and she stayed alive. And so did we, because they would have hunted us down no matter where we are, and killed us, and perhaps with the whole family. And I don't know how by this time, my father got some papers from a Swedish diplomat by the name of Raoul Wallenberg. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He tried to save as many Jews in Budapest as he could by giving us Swedish citizenships. And also he took us out from this designated Jewish house and brought us over to another building that he had. The building had a little plaque in front of it saying this is Swedish diplomatic property. The place was just as crowded, just as dirty, smelled just as bad as where we came from. But we hope that this will stop the Nazis from doing what they did. But the Nazis didn't care whether you were a Hungarian Jew, a Romanian Jew, a Swedish Jew, or any other kind of Jew. If you were a Jew, you have no right to live. By this time, Budapest is under siege by the Soviet army. The Soviet army is coming up from the east. The Allies are fighting the Germans from the west. The Germans kind of knew that the war was pretty much lost. And they stopped the deportations. There were no more deportations. But the killing of the Jews in Budapest did not stop. They herded the people out from these buildings, including the Swedish buildings. There were more than one. Took them down to the river bank, the Danube, which is a big, beautiful river running right through the center of Budapest. They lined the people up on the banks and they shot them. We did not live far from this place. Mercifully, I could not see this, but I could clearly hear it. We heard the cries and the screams of the people as they realized what was about to happen. We heard the orders being shouted. We heard the machine gun fire. And then we all sat there and listened to the silence, and we knew that all of them were dead. We also knew that sooner or later they will come for us. And one day they did. They came to our building and they told us that tomorrow morning we all have to be lined up in front of the building. Anybody who stays behind will be shot on the spot. And we knew where we were going and we knew why. And that was the worst night I ever had in my life. The women were all crying, hugging their children. The men was huddled together praying, and we hoped that morning would never come. But of course it did, because it always does. And very early that morning we heard rifle butts hanging on the front door, and the door had to be opened up. And there stood two Soviet soldiers with their submachine guns looking for Germans. The Soviet army took the street we lived on that night. Had there been 1 day late, I would not be here today to tell you the story. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Any questions?
Yes.
Okay. What a wonderful and inspiring message. And Mr. Selly has generously offered to answer a few questions for a few minutes. And I'll just lead off by saying that 76 years after World War II ended in the Holocaust, that this many people are gathered here. And I'm guessing with as few Jews as there are in the world, the country, and this community, most of the people in this room are not Jewish. The Holocaust was not a Jewish tragedy, it was a tragedy for humanity. Can you speak to how the non-Jews in this room are a part of the solution?
Well, first of all, I thank you all for coming. Whether you're Jewish or otherwise, it doesn't matter. With all human beings, we all made out of the same material. What you believe in, how you worship your God is up to you. The important thing is that you realize that we're all human and we all have a reason and a duty to live. So,
Steve, I think you had a question or a comment?
thank you, Steve. Thank you.
I'll ask another question. We're fortunate to have you here as a survivor, and at some point, God forbid, but we know it's going to happen, the last survivor will no longer be alive, and it's the children that survive and the grandchildren. Can you speak to that? Because we're in this time window with very few survivors left, there's stories being told and archived. Speak to that, and then we'll call on, is that Charlie over there? Okay. Fine, go ahead.
Well, I think it's very important to tell the story. It's very important for the children to learn the story because they are the future. And if they don't learn, then it will be repeated again because history always has a way of repeating itself. So the only thing that stands between us and another Holocaust is the children. They will be the leaders of the future, and they have to learn this lesson, and that is why I'm involved in Holocaust education, and this is why I speak to them all the time. And I think it's a very important thing to do.
Charlie?
I'm sorry, ask me another one.
What do we do now? What do we need to do now?
We have to do exactly what we are doing. We have to talk about it. We have to bring it to the surface. We cannot be complacent. We have to let the world know that we are still here.
Barbara, please join me. We're going to honor Mr. Selly now with a little honorary gift from Hurt.
Well, after all these years, it's really, what can somebody give you that you probably don't have? But we planted a tree in Israel in your honor. And this says, a tree has been planted in honor of Laszlo Selly to remember the 1.5 million children that were killed.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody.